We're coming up to a year since the military junta staged a coup in Myanmar, arresting leader Aung San Sui Kyi and started a civil war with an anti-junta militia that is still ongoing with no signs of conclusion. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how the civil war has panned out so far, why the junta is on the back foot, and what could happen next. But before we do, if you want to see more videos like this where we cover overseas conflicts you might not be keeping up with, then be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update from us. Anyway, let's get straight into it. To understand this story, you're going to need a bit of context. For most of its independent history, Myanmar has been ruled by a powerful military dictatorship, known as the Tatmadaw, with the occasional democratic stint. In the mid-2000s, under pressure from the international community and hoping to improve Myanmar's economic prospects, the Tatmadaw announced their intention to transform Myanmar into a functioning democracy. In 2008, they passed a new constitution which provided for democratic elections but also gave the military certain powers, including control over important ministries, and 25% of seats in both Myanmar's upper and lower chamber. In their first set of elections in 2010, the military's Union Solidarity and Development Party, otherwise known as the USDP, won a large majority in both houses, and the military were happy. But in the next set of elections in 2015, Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy turned the tables, winning a majority in both houses. In November 2020, after the NLD increased their majority, the military decided they'd had enough. The Tatmadaw alleged widespread voter fraud, claiming they'd found 8 million voting irregularities, and declared the election illegitimate. These claims were a clearly baseless pretext for a coup. They were disputed at the time by the Myanmar's Election Commission and have since been dismissed by international observers. Nonetheless, on the 1st of February 2021, the military staged a coup, arresting Aung San, and declared a year-long state of emergency. Somewhat unsurprisingly, this went down pretty poorly with the Myanmar public, who'd just voted overwhelmingly for Aung San's party, and protests began. For the first month or so, the military showed some restraint, and relied on legislative changes and internet blackouts. They introduced a load of draconian laws, and forced internet providers to cut off internet in order to prevent protesters from coordinating. But when the protests continued, the military decided to crack down. On February the 28th, the junta started using tear gas and automatic weapons on peaceful protesters. This was somewhat predictable. Two previous agitations for democracy in 1988 and 2007 ended in massacres, and in both cases the army hesitated for over a month before crushing the protesters. But this time, the crackdown didn't work, and protesters continued with more vigour. This was essentially for two reasons: the efficacy of a general strike and Myanmar's ethnic militias. Let's start with a general strike. Beginning in February, teachers, doctors, railway workers, truck drivers, custom agents and other bureaucrats stopped going into work, and the machinery of the Myanmar state ground to a halt. Perhaps most worryingly for the junta, bank employees also stopped working, causing most of the country's 2,000 private bank branches to shut, according to Frontier, a local magazine. Banks placed caps on withdrawal from cash machines or suspended them altogether. The generals tried to force banks to reopen, threatening everything from fines to nationalisation, but most employees were apparently too scared to return. The general strike successfully undermined the legitimacy of the military junta. After all, if you don't have control of the state, you're not really a government. And limited their ability to exercise control over the protests. The other reason the junta started to control the protests is that Myanmar is full of battle-hardened ethnic militias who really don't like the Tatmadaw. Myanmar is mostly populated by the Barma ethnic group, concentrated in central Myanmar, who make up about 68% of the population. Historically, the Myanmar state has been essentially Barma supremacist, oppressing its ethnic minorities. The Tatmadaw themselves are mostly Barma, and even Aung San's NLD presided over the abuse and genocide of the Rohingya Muslim minority, who make up about 2.5% of Myanmar's population before the genocide forced a mass exodus into Bangladesh. Anyway, in response, the various ethnic minorities set up their own militias and waged a low-intensity war against the Tatmadaw for most of its history. Today, there are about 20 ethnic militias, 10 of whom signed a ceasefire with the NLD government in 2015, with the Arakan army signing its own bilateral ceasefire in 2020. Anyway, while these ethnic militias weren't keen on Aung San and her NLD, the NLD were, after all, mostly Burma, and essentially considered the ethnic minorities second-class citizens. They're even less keen on the Tatmadaw, with whom they've been at war with for the best part of the last 50 years. All 10 signatories to the 2015 ceasefire expressly condemned the coup in February, and have since pledged allegiance to Aung San's shadow government, known as the National Unity Government. While the total number of ethnic militia only comes to about 80,000, far fewer than the 300,000 or so Tatmadaw members, they've helped support and arm protesters, and the army have struggled to overwhelm them. An important thing to note about the current conflict is that Burma have started turning on the Tatmadaw. Historically, the Burma have been totally loyal to the Tatmadaw, but their sheer brutality and administrative competence seems to have put some off. There have even been reports of Tatmadaw soldiers defecting to the rebels. According to the National Unity Government, a total of 8,000 soldiers and policemen have fled to territories controlled by rebels, while the Wilson Center, an American think tank, estimates that over 7,000 soldiers have deserted since the coup. This doesn't bode well at all for the Tatmadaw. Anyway, you get the point. The army have been unable to exert control over Myanmar due to the fact that they've been unable to get a hold of the machinery of the state or overpower the ethnic militias. So, what happens now? Well, who wins the war is anyone's guess. Things don't look good for the Tatmadaw. Despite their numerical advantage, they're losing the war, and Myanmar's crumbling economy means they're running out of money fast. Their only real ally appears to be Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, and even China, who were historically the Tatmadaw's biggest trading partner, appear unconvinced. With the help of hundreds of civil servants who have resigned since the coup, the National Unity Government, currently recognised by the EU Parliament and French Senate as Myanmar's legitimate government, has begun building a parallel state and trying to distribute humanitarian aid to the 200,000 Myanmar citizens who've been uprooted from their homes since the coup. The National Unity Government will hopefully foster better relations between the Burma and other ethnic minorities, given their cooperation over the last 11 months, but this is a thin silver lining. This civil war has crippled Myanmar, which is looking more and more like a failed state. Some 1,500 people have been confirmed killed by the junta, and nearly 9,000 detained, although the actual figures are likely much higher. In July, the World Bank estimated that the country's economy had shrunk by 30%, and the share of Myanmar's population living in poverty would double from 25% in 2017 to about 50% in 2022. The conflict also looks unlikely to end anytime soon. The army has proved unable to control the rebels, which is why the general Min Aung Hlaing recently extended the state of emergency until 2023. But the rebels are clearly unable to completely overthrow the army, which has hundreds of thousands more men. So that's what's happening in Myanmar. It's, well, pretty bad. Anyway, what do you think? How does this end? Could we see Myanmar split into two separate states, one run by the NUG and the other by the Tatmadaw? Or will Myanmar just become a failed state? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers for making videos like this one possible, and if you want to see your name at the end of videos just like these people, you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is down below.